3 minutes ago, Princess Anne made a quiet statement that sent the monarchy into freefall. In a hushed voice and with a steady stare, she revealed a secret even palace insiders weren't prepared for. King Charles didn't leave his legacy to Camilla. He left it to Catherine's children. And the fallout has already begun. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It happened in the most unexpected of ways. A press appearance so routine it almost went unnoticed until it wasn't. Princess Anne, long regarded as the family's unshakable spine, stepped up to a podium and delivered a message that froze reporters in place. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. But every word carried the weight of an empire being tilted on its axis. She said simply that her brother Charles had made a final decision before his passing, a decision that would not include Camilla in his legacy. Instead, his wealth, properties, and personal trusts were to be handed down to the children of Catherine, Princess of Wales. Not William. Not the institution. The children. It was a statement so sharp, so unanticipated that silence fell over the room like a hammer. The timing couldn't have been more unsettling. Just weeks after Charles's memorial, just days before Camilla's scheduled speech on the future of the monarchy. Some called it sabotage. Others whispered it was Anne honoring a dying wish. But inside the palace, it sparked chaos. The royal rota, usually locked in rehearsed questions and pre-approved quotes, erupted in a frenzy of speculation. What did she just say? One journalist tweeted. Within minutes, clips circulated online, slowed down, transcribed, dissected. Anne's words were calm, but her eyes revealed something deeper resolve laced with sorrow. She wasn't just revealing a truth, she was lifting a burden. Palace staff were reportedly blindsided. Private advisors scrambled for clarification, but none came. And Camilla? Sources say she was in total shock. One insider claimed she collapsed into a chair upon hearing the news, repeating the same stunned phrase, "He promised me. He promised me everything." And yet her name was not mentioned in the inheritance. Not once. The queen consort, publicly honored, ceremonially crowned, had been written out of the legacy in silence. For the monarchy's most polarizing figure, it was more than a betrayal. It was an erasure. Within the hour, hashtags surged to global trending status, hashtag royal betrayal, hashtag Anne speaks, hashtag Camilla left out. Public reaction split down the middle. Some called it justice, others, cruelty. But no one could deny the magnitude of what had just happened. A crown once defined by protocol had been pierced by human emotion. A system designed to outlive individuals was now being unraveled by them. And in the center of it all stood the next generation: George, Charlotte, and Louis, now not just heirs by blood, but by name. By will. But this wasn't just a moment of honesty, it was the unsealing of a vault that had been locked for decades. Behind palace doors, they called it the Quiet Pact. A deal made years before the crown passed. Anne swore never to speak of it until now. What was promised? What was hidden? And why did Charles trust only her? It began in a room no one remembers, during a year most would rather forget. King Charles, then still a prince, invited his sister Anne to a secluded part of Balmoral. No staff, no recordings. Just the two of them, and a conversation that would quietly shift the future of the monarchy. He was anxious, restless, Anne would later recall, and spoke not like a man in power, but like a father uncertain of the storm ahead. Charles confessed something he had never admitted publicly, that while he had loved Camilla, he no longer trusted what her presence meant for the legacy of the crown. He feared that proximity to power had changed her, and that the whispers of influence, manipulation, and quiet consolidation weren't just rumors, they were strategies. Anne listened, tight-lipped as always, and then he asked her for something no monarch should ever ask of a sibling: protection, not for himself, but for the children of Catherine. Anne didn't flinch. She had always been the loyal one, the iron rod beneath the velvet drapery. She agreed reluctantly, quietly, without knowing what it would cost. The pact was simple, brutal, and clear. Should anything happen, she would ensure that Charles's wishes to bypass Camilla and protect the next true heirs would be upheld at any cost. But to honor that promise, the pact had to remain hidden, and Anne kept her silence for years. Even as tensions rose, even as the public narrative painted Camilla as the queen-in-waiting, and the children as ornamental symbols, not central players. Anne watched it unfold with the same stoicism she was raised to master, even as her conscience began to fracture. What the world never knew was that Charles had gone one step further. He embedded a clause deep, buried, almost unreachable within the royal trust framework. A clause that designated Catherine's children, not his wife, as the rightful inheritors of personal estates, private assets, and even symbolic artifacts once belonging to their grandmother Diana. This clause had been crafted in legal language so dense it escaped scrutiny for years. But Anne knew, and the moment Charles passed, the moment the will's outer pages were signed and sealed for public ceremony, Anne began to prepare for the truth. And with it, the reckoning. There had been pressure, of course. Advisors who urged her to destroy the records. Camilla's inner circle, who suspected something and whispered about Anne's suspicious discretion. But she held the line, until her guilt became too much to bear. She had watched Catherine suffer in silence. She had watched the children smile for the cameras while being quietly sidelined. And she had watched Camilla rise confident, comfortable, and utterly unaware that her reign was built on a foundation already promised to someone else. Anne didn't reveal the pact to wound. She revealed it because legacies aren't built on silence. They're built on truth. But the pact was only part of the story. The real power was hidden in the will, sealed, buried, and never meant to be seen. For years it was rumored to exist. A secret version of King Charles's will. But now, pieces of that document are surfacing, and what they say changes everything. Behind the scenes, the monarchy is built on two things: tradition and paperwork. And somewhere in the vast tangle of trust agreements, title deeds, and sealed royal archives, Charles had left behind more than a ceremonial inheritance. He had left behind a shadow document, one that was never intended to reach the public eye. It wasn't the version read to the Privy Council or released through official channels. This version was encrypted, buried within private legal holdings tied to Balmoral and Sandringham estates, and marked under a legal maneuver known as a confidential sovereign clause. A provision rarely used, almost never discussed, and powerful enough to bypass even the highest levels of royal oversight. But now, it's no longer a whisper in legal circles. It's a revelation threatening to crack the crown from the inside out. According to documents leaked by a whistleblower close to Charles's personal legal team, the alternate version of the will redirects vast swaths of inheritance not to the queen consort, as most had assumed, but to three very specific names: George, Charlotte, and Louis. Catherine's children. The next generation. Not a trust held in William's name, not a collective royal fund, but individual protections, properties, and heirlooms listed specifically under each of the children's titles. Among the items was a private letter addressed to the future King George, allegedly containing Charles's own handwritten explanation for the move. The legacy must be earned by those who carry it with dignity, the line read, sparking fierce debate among those who have seen the leak. Even more shocking was who didn't know. Senior advisors were kept entirely in the dark. Legal aides associated with Camilla's household were reportedly barred from certain meetings during the final months of Charles's decline. Only two legal minds had access to the full contents of the sealed clause, and both were under non-disclosure agreements reinforced with royal privilege. And yet, one of them cracked. Just days after Anne's public reveal, the first pages of the Confidential will found their way to the hands of an international media outlet. And there, in cold, clinical legal language, one detail screamed above all others: Camilla's name was nowhere to be found. The silence surrounding her omission grew louder with every passing hour. Questions spread faster than answers. Had Charles suspected his time was running short? Was this a last-minute rewrite to correct a legacy he feared might be misused? The signature on the Confidential will bore a date that raised eyebrows across the monarchy just 2 weeks before his final hospitalization. Those close to him say he became reclusive in that period. Obsessive. Focused on what he would leave behind. Not in public, but in private. A final act of defiance, or an act of redemption. The monarchy now finds itself cornered by its own secrets. What was once hidden in legal labyrinths has begun bleeding into the open. Camilla, once ascendant, is now surrounded by shadows. And Charles, though gone, has unleashed a tidal wave of consequences through the pen he held in secret. And as this buried truth clawed its way to daylight, one woman's silence turned into devastation. She stood by him through scandal, exile, and coronation. But in the end, she was erased. Camilla's reaction to the inheritance betrayal wasn't dignified, it was explosive. When the leaked version of King Charles's secret will broke into the public sphere, the first to be hit by its seismic force was the woman who had built her entire image on steadfastness and survival, Camilla. For years, she had endured whispers and firestorms, won over the press, and risen from reviled mistress to queen consort. She had stood beside Charles as the monarchy rebranded itself for a modern world. But nothing had prepared her for this. According to a senior palace aide, the moment Camilla saw the clause excluding her name, her response wasn't a silent breath of disbelief. It was rage. She screamed for an hour, the aide reported, visibly shaken. Not from fear, but from the rawness of betrayal that poured out of a woman who had believed the crown was finally hers to keep. Her team acted immediately. Phone calls, legal threats, messages to PR firms demanding statements be drafted, photos be removed, narratives be reshaped. Damage control wasn't just an option, it became the command center of her world. Within 24 hours, her closest advisors were locked behind doors, trying to spin the story as a miscommunication, a clerical oversight, anything but intentional. But there was no rewriting this script. The exclusion was too specific, too surgical, too personal. Camilla's name wasn't overlooked, it was erased. And that kind of silence spoke louder than any royal decree. Multiple insiders confirmed that Camilla attempted to confront Princess Anne in person, demanding a meeting to clarify the narrative. But her request was reportedly blocked. Not denied, outright ignored. The coldest rejection of all. Days later, a recording surfaced from inside the palace, a recording palace officials tried desperately to suppress. The voice, unmistakably Camilla's, trembled with fury. "He promised me everything. Everything. And now they've taken it from me." The recording, leaked anonymously, exploded across the internet. It wasn't the content alone that shocked people, it was the pain. The queen, who had always played the long game, had finally lost. And she knew it. In the days that followed, Camilla vanished from public view. Scheduled appearances were quietly canceled. Paparazzi who once tracked her every movement now reported blackout zones and stone-faced security guards. The woman once praised for resilience was suddenly nowhere to be seen. The silence, ironically, was deafening. Royal analysts began to speculate. Was she planning legal retaliation? Would she attempt to challenge the will? Could the monarchy sustain the fallout of a royal civil war, waged not between brothers but between generations? But the real question looming wasn't about money. It was about legitimacy. If Charles had intentionally bypassed Camilla in his final act as sovereign, what did that say about her standing in the House of Windsor? Titles, influence, reverence, they all came crashing down under the weight of one decision. And suddenly, the woman who had once reshaped the monarchy in her image stood on the edge of its margins, watching her future unravel in silence. But Camilla wasn't the only one unraveling. Inside the palace, lines were being drawn, and loyalties were shifting. He should have felt victorious. Instead, Prince William is caught in the crossfire, torn between honoring his father's wishes and protecting the mother of his children. But nothing in the palace comes without a cost. In the hours following Anne's bombshell, as Camilla's world unraveled and royal aides scrambled for footing, Prince William stood in a silence far more telling than any press statement. It wasn't triumph on his face, it was disbelief. The very core of his world had shifted beneath him, not just politically but personally. He hadn't known. Not about the clause. Not about the pact. Not even about the true extent of Charles's mistrust toward Camilla. For a man raised to be king, William had been kept in the shadows of the very legacy he was destined to inherit. Behind palace gates, he didn't explode. He didn't raise his voice. But those close to him described something worse: disgust, laced with a profound sense of betrayal. He had buried his father with reverence, unaware that the man he mourned had withheld the most seismic truth of all. Advisors urged immediate damage control. Draft a statement, support the will, acknowledge Anne, reassure the public. But William refused. Every draft presented to him was shredded figuratively and literally. He wasn't ready to speak, because he hadn't yet decided what he believed. Privately, he confided in a trusted aide that this legacy didn't feel like his, it felt like a trap. The burden of duty now came with a poisoned chalice: defend a father's dying wish, or risk fracturing the family once again. Meanwhile, Catherine pleaded for calm behind closed doors, urging him not to let grief become a weapon. But the air around them thickened with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Old tensions reignited in silence. William's barely concealed resentment toward Camilla began to bubble to the surface. The polished smiles from past engagements had always been a performance, civil but cold. Now the gloves were off. He didn't need to say her name for the message to be clear. "This wasn't my plan," he reportedly told a royal insider, eyes heavy with exhaustion. The phrase echoed louder than he intended. Because in truth, this legacy wasn't built on his choices, it was built on everyone else's agendas. His father, his aunt, even the memory of his mother, whose shadow still lingered in every public step he took. But beneath the titles and tradition, one fear gripped him harder than any other: that he was becoming what he despised. The next, manipulated heir. Another figurehead in a story written by others. He had spent his life trying to be different, less cold, more modern, more human. But now, as he stood at the edge of a crumbling royal fade, William saw the terrifying truth in the mirror. He wasn't guiding the crown. The crown was still guiding him. And as William tried to hold the center, the crown's most quiet figure stepped into the light. Catherine. They underestimated her. But now, with her children at the heart of a royal legacy war, Catherine is no longer playing the role of silent consort, she's leading the narrative. For years, she had been labeled the polished figure beside the heir, the dutiful duchess turned princess who said little and smiled often. But when the monarchy fractured under the weight of Charles's final decisions, it wasn't William or Anne who gave the first poised response, it was Catherine. In a brief, composed statement to the press, she spoke not of chaos, conflict, or betrayal, but of continuity, of stability, and of ensuring a future where the values of integrity and honor remain at the center of all we protect. The words themselves were uncontroversial, but their timing and subtext weren't missed. This wasn't a defense. It was a declaration. A subtle, strategic assertion that her children were not pawns in someone else's game, they were now the future of the monarchy. Body language analysts went into overdrive. Her tone was soft but clipped, her posture elegant but grounded. No ring on her finger that day, which set off another wave of speculation. Her final glance at the cameras was calm, direct, and defiant. It wasn't performative, it was precise. Experts called it one of the most carefully calibrated public appearances in modern royal history. But the real moves were happening behind the scenes. A private meeting with Princess Anne was confirmed through a palace leak just 48 hours later. The sisters-in-law, once separated by generational roles, were now aligned by purpose. Sources close to the meeting described it as less of a conversation and more of a handoff. Anne had protected the truth. Catherine was now tasked with protecting what came next. Behind closed doors, security measures were reportedly intensified. Documents suggest that protection protocols for George, Charlotte, and Louis were adjusted, with new specialists brought in, including cyber defense consultants and diplomatic risk experts. A signal that whatever the public was seeing, the palace expected escalation behind the curtain. Catherine, meanwhile, maintained her scheduled school runs, public appearances, patronage visits. But every step was now laced with layered meaning. No longer the supporting figure in William's ascent, she had become the anchor of the crown's future. Media coverage shifted dramatically. Where once she was compared to Diana for grace, she was now being likened to Elizabeth for strategy. Headlines dubbed her the monarchy's last hope, a title that carried both reverence and risk. Because in a family so entangled with history, being the last hope often means being the last line of defense. And Catherine, long underestimated, now stood not just for her husband or her children, but for an institution teetering between survival and collapse. But not everyone wanted the story to end with Catherine's quiet triumph. In the shadows, Another player was preparing a final move. Just when the monarchy thought it had re-established control, another twist emerged. Prince Harry, estranged, exiled, forgotten, booked a last-minute flight to London. But he didn't come to mourn. He came with questions. The jet touched down in silence, but the impact was thunderous. No press, no announcement, no ceremonial guards. Just Harry, unaccompanied, stepping back into the kingdom he had once called home, a kingdom now unrecognizable. Within hours, the media frenzy ignited. Rumors circulated like wildfire. Was he here to reclaim his place? To confront the palace? Or to tear down what remained of it? One thing was certain: he hadn't come for a photo op. He hadn't come with Meghan. Her absence was as loud as his presence, and it left questions hanging in the air. Had she refused to return, or had she been told not to? But Harry wasn't interested in cameras. He wanted answers. And he started where no one expected: Princess Anne. Their private conversation, behind closed doors in a rarely used wing of the palace, lasted just under an hour. No aides, no transcripts, just a locked door and two people bound by blood and by secrets. What was said inside remains unconfirmed, but sources close to the family claim Harry emerged pale, silent, visibly shaken. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't release a statement. But he stopped by one place before returning to his hotel, the Memorial at Kensington, where his mother's legacy still lingered like smoke. That visit wasn't sentimental. It was strategic. Because as Anne's revelations dominated headlines and Catherine's children were named the new bearers of Charles's estate, something else had resurfaced: a document from the past. Diana's original inheritance plan. A plan that, before amendments and royal interference, placed both sons on equal footing. A plan that had quietly vanished after her death. And now, with Charles's will rewriting the future and Camilla cut out, Harry was asking, what else had been rewritten? Had Diana's wishes been buried the same way his had? An emotional meeting between the brothers followed. But if the press had hoped for reconciliation, they were sorely mistaken. Insiders described it as cold, clipped, and unfinished. William stood firm, guarded by layers of protocol. Harry was different: raw, demanding, unwilling to play polite. At one point, he allegedly told William, "You're protecting a legacy that never protected us." The air between them never warmed. The room stayed silent long after Harry left. He didn't come to light a match, but he left a trail of gasoline. Because beneath all the strategy, the press management, and the whispered allegiances, Harry had one thing no one else possessed: distance. And from that distance, he saw the full picture. A monarchy that had twisted itself to survive, even at the expense of its own. What he didn't yet know, what none of them knew, was that buried within the mountain of sealed memories and forgotten tapes, one voice, one final recording was waiting to speak. And while Harry searched for answers, one final piece fell into place: a recording, hidden for years, now released to the world. A voicemail no one expected. A final message from King Charles, discovered on a secure line. And with it, his voice, tired, firm, and resolute, confirming the decision that would rewrite royal history. The leak didn't come through a media outlet. It didn't arrive in an email or get passed to a reporter. It was uploaded anonymously to a hidden server, discovered by a cyber watchdog group monitoring encrypted royal archives. The file was short, just under 2 minutes, but its contents detonated across the monarchy like a bomb. It was King Charles. His unmistakable voice, thinner than the public had heard it in recent years, but still commanding. A voice both haunted and at peace. The voicemail, recorded just days before his final hospital admission, was intended for one recipient, his legal advisor, but it found its way to the world. In the message, Charles begins with a truth he had never admitted aloud. "This was not easy," he said. "But the crown is not about comfort. It is about continuity." There was no hesitation, no second guessing. He laid out, in his own words, what had been long suspected but never confirmed: that the future of the monarchy would not rest with his wife, but with the children of William and Catherine. "My duty," he said slowly, "is not to my past, but to the future of the crown." And in that sentence, a lifetime of conflict, scandal, and divided loyalties was compressed into something final, something unshakable. He spoke of Catherine with quiet reverence, not as a daughter-in-law but as a cornerstone. He called her the steady flame when all others flickered, Of William there was pride. Of the children George, Charlotte, and Louis there was hope. But of Camilla there was nothing. Not a word, not even a coded reference. Her absence from the message said more than any name could. It wasn't a personal slight. It was a strategic silence. And the world understood exactly what it meant. When the voicemail was broadcast first in fragments, then in full, the reaction was instant. Half the public stood in awe of the king's resolve. The other half seethed with outrage, claiming it was betrayal veiled as foresight. Political commentators called it a final act of brilliance. Royal loyalists branded it cowardice. But no one, not even Charles's fiercest critics, could deny the impact. This was not the monarchy adapting. This was the monarchy transforming itself in real time, with the ghost of its own sovereign guiding the transition. And so the final words of King Charles were not a farewell. They were a reset, a royal recalibration that ignored protocol and rewrote precedents. Not through legal documents, but through a voice fragile, honest, and ultimately unshaken. As his final sentence played across televisions and phones around the globe, "Let the crown endure. Even if I am not remembered for it, the monarchy felt less eternal and more human." And as the world listened to the last words of a king, a final tremor shook the monarchy, a secret vote behind palace walls. Camilla once stood where no one believed she ever would, beside the throne. But after Charles's final wish, Anne's confession, and the world's shifting loyalties, the title of queen was more illusion than reality. Behind the polished walls of the monarchy, a final decision was being made. One that wouldn't be broadcast, televised, or openly debated. A private vote among the highest-ranking members of the royal council was quietly held to determine the future of Camilla's standing. No robes, no rituals, just a room filled with names that had built their lives on discretion and influence. And when the vote ended, the result was swift and cold. Camilla would remain queen consort in name only, but several ceremonial privileges, those that defined her public presence, were to be removed. No more processional duties, no more national tours. Her portrait, once planned to hang beside Charles's, would now be omitted from the official succession hall. Her reign had ended not with crisis, but with quiet recalibration. No statement followed. No speech. Just a subtle change on the royal household's official website. Her profile was edited. A few lines removed, mentions of her upcoming engagements erased, the title remained. But the power behind it had vanished, and then came the photo. One image, splashed across front pages around the world. Camilla, walking alone across a royal courtyard, her face obscured, her posture unreadable. The headline beneath it cut deep. Her reign ends in silence. It wasn't an insult. It was a eulogy. The spotlight, once fixed on her ascent, now pivoted entirely. Catherine and Anne made a rare joint appearance days later. A show of unity so deliberate it required no explanation. Side by side, poised, composed, and unbothered by the storm that had passed, they were no longer supporting characters, they were the new foundation. The cameras loved them. The public applauded them. The crown, it seemed, had chosen its future, and the past had been neatly folded behind velvet drapes. But it wasn't the headlines or the website edits that stung most. It was the whisper, one that circled quietly through the corridors of the palace and echoed through the press with no source, but 1,000 confirmations. A single line, spoken by an unnamed insider, but picked up by commentators around the globe: the real queen never needed a crown. And with that, Camilla's story was sealed, not erased, but rewritten. She had reached the throne. She had worn the jewels, but in the end, they were not hers to keep. Not because of scandal nor public rejection, but because of a truth too heavy to be held by title alone. A truth that belonged not to legacy, but to character. It had always been about the future. And in the future's eyes, the crown now sat elsewhere. And so, in the end, it wasn't jewels or titles that determined legacy, it was truth. A truth revealed not with trumpets, but with quiet rebellion. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.